Hi, Sarah. I'm really excited to talk with you about the legislative process here in Vermont. We often hear, how will this work? And we now have opportunity to look at some model legislation coming out of NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and thinking about how that will translate to local work in the state of Vermont.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm so excited to be here to talk with you about one of my favorite subjects. We often talk about how a bill becomes a law, but I think we actually have to start before that with how an idea becomes a law. Because in order for a bill to be introduced, somebody has to have an idea for that bill. So ideas for bills can come from anybody who is a constituent of an elected official. And sometimes the constituent will have a piece of model legislation. And that's what we're talking about here, is that there's a national organization, NAEYC, that's working on a piece of model legislation that they'll craft that they then encourage every state to adopt.
So I just heard you say that this model legislation has to be implemented across all 50 states. Is that correct?
The bill, the law won't look exactly identical from state to state, but the idea is that every state recognizes early childhood education as a profession. And our goal will be to try to make sure that whatever passes in Vermont is as close as possible to what the national groups are recommending, while also reflecting the specific laws of Vermont.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it looks like for a bill to travel through Vermont's legislative process?
So we as constituents would talk to legislators and ask them to introduce a bill that would recognize early childhood education as a profession in Vermont. And those legislators in turn talk to each other and talk to the legislative council and say, I'd like to introduce a bill, and here's some model legislation from a national organization that's being worked on in multiple states that I'd like you to start from. And then the legislators work with the legislative council to sort of determine exactly how to shape that bill so that it will fit within the confines of the Vermont statutes. And then a bill gets introduced, and bills are introduced either in the House or in the Senate. And each bill has to travel through both the full House of Representatives and the full Senate. So let's just say, for example, it was introduced in the House. So it then gets introduced, and the Speaker of the House would refer it to a committee. So there's an Education Committee, there's a Human Services Committee, there's a Government Operations Committee in the House side. There are lots of different committees that might have an interest in a bill that was looking to create a new profession. Typically, those committees will bring in lots of witnesses, like early childhood educators, hear about why this bill is important, what it would do, what it would mean for people on the ground in Vermont. And the committee goes through a deliberative process together, and then the bill would pass out of the committee. So lots of different committees might go through that process, and then eventually the bill goes back to the full House of Representatives for a vote. And there's a debate, and it gets voted on one time, and then it actually comes back again for what's known as the third reading, which is another opportunity for amendments to be proposed, for people to ask more questions, for more conversation, and then a final vote in the House of Representatives. And then once it passes the House, it will go over to the Senate and go through the exact same process on the Senate side. There are lots of opportunities in this process for us to make our voices heard and to make sure that whatever bill comes out the other side is as strong as possible. And in this case, that it stays as close as we can make it to what's been recommended nationally, so that we know that we are pretty close to what other states might be doing.
So if the House and the Senate pass it, how does it become a law?
Assuming we make it all the way through the House and then all the way through the Senate. And then if there are any differences between the House version and the Senate version, then a conference committee works out those details most of the time. And then it goes back to both the House and the Senate for a final approval. And then there's still one more step, which is the governor. So a bill goes to the governor, and then the governor has the choice to either sign the bill, which is what we will be hoping for. He can also just let the bill become law without his signature, or he has the option to veto it, which is what we would be hoping to avoid. But if a governor does veto a bill, then the legislature has the opportunity to override his veto and have the bill become law anyway.
Wow, that's a really complex system, but it sounds like it's so authentic to make sure that the voices of the workforce are heard, making this nationally cohesive, as well as making it match Vermont's culture and Vermont's systems.
And it can be a complicated system for sure. But the good news is there are lots of us who are in the building representing the interests of folks out in the field. And our job is to make sure that your voices are heard in the State House. It's critically important that whatever happens in the legislative process is very well informed by the voices of those who are most impacted. And in this case, we're talking about early childhood educators.
Sarah, this has been so informative. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks so much, Rachel. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. We are at such an exciting moment in the evolution of early childhood education in Vermont and in the nation. And I really look forward to working with all of you on this going forward.